This show is sponsored by Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today is a personal branding and performance coach, a highly sought-after keynote speaker, and author of the new, revised, and expanded edition of From Invisible to Icon: How to Become a Known Expert in Your Industry. It's also published, and this is so important to hear this part, because not everybody, you have self-published and you have these big publishers, and this one's a really well-known one, and so I'm very proud to present this. It's published by Post Hill Press and distributed by Simon & Schuster. I've read a lot of great books from them. He's been a featured speaker at events in Australia, Brazil, Croatia, Egypt, France, Germany, Hungary. He's been around the world, Ireland, United Arab Emirates, and across the U.S., Canada, and Caribbean. Prior to his distinguished consulting career, he spent 15 years as a professional magician, performing on cruise ships and casinos and at private clubs such as the famed Magic Castle in Hollywood, California. He's also served 6 years in the U.S. Marine Corps. In his mid-30s, he began a successful hotel, tourism, and leisure consulting career as a solo practitioner. Having never worked in the industry and without the benefit of a college education, he spent the next 30 years advancing from invisible to icon in the industry. We're going to learn so much about some of his tips. Please welcome the global chairman of Horwath HTL, the leading brand, and oversees the firm's American offices. Please welcome John Fareed. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week.
This is really cool. This has been quite an intro here. We have so many different backgrounds to kind of break down in terms of you've excelled in all of them. It's like, as I'm reading through it, and you go, and also served as in the U.S. Marine. It's like when you put and also as U.S. Marines and you're not leading with U.S. Marines, it's like, okay, this guy's got a lot on his plate.
Well, I love you for saying that. It's been a long journey. I'll say that for sure. But I'm enjoying it. This has been a good week for me. The book released. Simon & Schuster dropped the book on the 30th on Tuesday, and we've got a bunch of book signings coming up at Barnes & Noble's in Orlando, to Honolulu, to the Fifth Avenue store in New York, and it looks like we're headed to Dublin, Ireland even. So I'm pretty excited about it. But I'm equally excited to be on your show.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I wanted to make sure in all the list of countries that you had, I was gonna pause and not continue to read all of them. And I was like, well, I got to put Ireland in there because I know you're going to Ireland very soon. So I was like, I got to make sure everybody knows he's also spoken in Ireland. So from a keynoting career, being an author, those things, we're going to actually, everybody listening right now, we're going to hold off on those a little bit because those are really present moment for what he's doing, and certainly going to be talking about the book launch. So cool to have an author on that is going to be featured in all these different great bookstores. And also I want to speak about the publishing aspect of everything, because I'm soon to be a self-published author. I'm working on my book right now with an editor, and we're going to be publishing that together. And so I'm learning that process. But of course, what do we all aspire for? We all aspire to get someone like Simon & Schuster to back us, to get one of the big brands to back us. And so I'm very interested in that as well. And I'm sure we're going to get to there. But before that, you have a bit of a unique background, and you were sharing a little bit about it with me pre-show here, about how your mom and your dad met, and a little bit about your family history. I would love if you could jump into that for us right now so we get to know you a little bit.
Sure. So Michael, I'm first generation American on my mother's side of the family. My Egyptian grandfather was a fighter pilot in the RAF, and he kind of worked his way up the ranks to become a brigadier general, and later became ambassador from the Arab League to Japan and then to the UN. But he finished his professional life in hotels and travel. He opened the Nile Hilton in 1958 with Conrad Hilton, and later became head of Hilton's small but important Middle East division, and finished his travel career as head of PR for Egypt Airlines. So back in those days, he was kind of a cool cat, let's just say, for sure. But back in those days, well-heeled Egyptians sent their sons and daughters to university in Europe and the US, and he was a lifelong Rotarian, and he secured a Rotary scholarship for my mom to come here to university. I guess the story takes a turn because shortly after arriving, she was unchaperoned for the first time in her life. And she met the school's, what I would say is equally naive, 6'4", blonde-headed, blue-eyed basketball star from Alabama. And boom, I was like conceived. So I will say this, my grandfather, more or less, who's a devout Muslim, and he more or less disowned my mom, both emotionally and financially. Don't come home, don't call, don't write, sort of thing. But I was fortunate because he'd had 2 daughters with my granny, Lulu, and I was the firstborn male who carried his name Fareed. So I spent many summers growing up in Egypt being treated like a prince, while my mom would remain sequestered in the back bedroom where only the women could visit her. I rarely saw my mom over the summers until we were headed to the airport to fly back home where we lived in North Georgia. Primarily, by the way, on food stamps and welfare, more or less a single mom for some years. But just before my 18th birthday, the summer, over a quiet lunch, my grandfather asked me where I was planning on attending university. And I said, yeah, I really don't think I'm going to university. I want to be a professional magician. I could tell by your facial expression, you kind of get the gist of the response I got from the general ambassador. He's like, what? No, if you're not going to go to university, then you will serve in the military like me and my father and my grandfather before me, which was a shock to me. He's like, there will be no magic. And I knew what that meant to him. I knew that was one of those things where I could end up in the back bedroom, disowned. But essentially, I thought about it because Michael, I guess this would be important for people to know, but he carried me during those summers everywhere, business meetings, lunches, dinners, shopping, of course. And he taught me a lot. He taught me about manners and table manners, which is always helpful these days. How to buy a gentleman's suit, shoes, or timepiece. But he also taught me about business, such as the importance of long-term relationships, or I would say skills like negotiation, or the concept of face and honor. So I looked at him and I said, Grandpa, you're asking something huge of me, because in the U.S., right now, military is not required like it is in Egypt at the time. So I don't have to go in the military. So I need to ask something equally big of you, or you're not going to respect me as a man. And he looked at me, and I'm telling you, if he was with us today, Michael, he would tell you he thought I was going to ask for a car, and he was ready to write that check. But essentially, I looked at him and I said, I will happily go in the military if you agree to take Mom back fully and completely. And there was silence at first, and then he slammed his hand on the table. He walked out onto the lanai. I watched him light a cigarette and pour whiskey, which is a rare thing for sure, especially in the middle of the day. But he came back in and he sat and he looked at me for 20 minutes in silence. And I'm sure everybody knows the art of negotiation. After you make your ask, you do not speak. But eventually he finally looked up at me and he said, okay, I'll do this, but it has to be the Marines. And what did I know? I was like, all right, fine. So we shook on it. And the very next day, Michael, he took my mom back. He walked down the hallway, knocked on her bedroom door and said, Merva, her name was Merva, come join us for breakfast. And she did, sheepishly. And my grandfather explained to her that my granny Lulu was going to take her to the salon and to buy a new dress, and that we were going to go to the country club to have lunch with the entire family, which was kind of funny because she looked up at me from her breakfast and she said, "What did you do?" And I said, "I'm going in the Marines, Mom." Needless to say, she was not happy about it. But I have to tell you, that day at the Gazira Country Club in Cairo was awesome. And it opened a door. And just to try to shorten this up a little bit, my grandparents, Salah and Lulu, ended up moving to North Georgia shortly thereafter. And my mom and my grandfather were completely close, tight for the rest of their years. So it was totally worth it. But I did keep my promise. That's why I went in the Marines. I spent 6 years in the Marines. But when I came out, I pursued my dream of magic. And for 15 years, I was a professional entertainer, like you shared with everybody, in casinos, on cruise ships, and at clubs like the Magic Castle. But I think there's this time where you come.
The audio is cutting out. I
think there's a time where you come to this real
audio is cutting out.
Yeah, I think there's a time where. Okay.
Just hang on for a second here. It looks like it's trying to get back together. Make a note at about 11 minutes. 11 minutes. We'll edit that out. But you're back.
So what I was going to say is, I think a lot of people come to a conclusion in their mid-30s. They're either pleased with their life or not pleased. And I came to the realization that I had no home, no car, no dog, no long-term relationships we're talking about, no kids. And I decided to make the natural pivot to hotel consulting. And I started out as a consultant in my mid-30s.
Mm. I want to just kind of go back for a second here, because there was a huge contrast in your life. You mentioned, you were in Egypt, you were treated like a prince, but you'd come back home and you were on welfare and food stamps. And this had to do with the major separation between your grandfather and his daughter, of course, and the situation that she was in. I'm interested in your mindset in how you were able to adapt to these two worlds you essentially had to straddle.
Yeah, so I grew up in a little town called Ellijay, Georgia, which is very small. It's still very small. But it was frustrating because I would come home from summer vacation, and obviously the teachers, you can imagine in 5th or 6th grade, "Hey, what did you do this summer? Tommy, let's start with you." And Tommy shares about his, summer camping and fishing or whatnot. Everybody shares. And I always got up and talked about, I was climbing pyramids and riding camels in Egypt. So I was a little bit of a freak. I hate to use the word freak. I was different. So it was unique. I was this stud in high school. When you play the tuba in band and you're the captain of the chess team and you're in drama club, you're winning. But I found that I was more accepted in those types of groups from a background standpoint. But it was good for me. I learned a lot, and I found my own, rhythm. And that's what I did. One of the cool things, and you'll find this interesting, is that in 8th grade, I wanted to help, earn some money for the family. And at the time, 8th grade was about right. I went to my drama teacher and said, "I want a job, but please, I don't want to pump gas or bag groceries, or I need something that's going to stimulate me and lift me a little bit." And 2 weeks later, she called me and she said, "Hey, come to my office." So I went to her office and she said, "The local radio station," and I told her that I needed a job to help with the family, but I didn't want to pay for, too long of a break.
No worries.
I didn't want to pump gas or bag groceries, and I wanted to do something that would be more challenging and uplifting. And a couple of weeks later, she called me into her office and she said, "So the local radio station, this is in Ellijay, Georgia, called WLEJ, very original, the Big Apple, because it's the Apple capital of the South. a gentleman by the name of Bob Schwab, who owned the station, was looking for an afternoon DJ. And he reached out to the drama teacher at the high school, and she said, sure, I got the guy. So I went and auditioned, and for 4 years, I was the drive time DJ in little bitty LJ, Georgia, which is kind of a hip and cool thing, by the way, at the time. So that was fun. But outside of those kinds of things, finding groups of people that I felt comfortable with, that accepted me and whatnot. By the time I got to my senior year, I was cooking with gas, and I didn't have any more problems.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think too, like it sounds like you took on a lot of leadership roles in order to, I guess, showcase your abilities in that, while you may not have had everything that everybody else had in your community, you were able to show that you actually have the mindset of a leader, which we see in all the other things that you've done in your life and in your experiences. I'm also a little bit interested in the cruise ships now and the magician life. We just talked about how you're a performer. I'm interested in, for me, my performance background has helped me in my keynotes and in my speaking and in what we're doing today right now on a podcast. And so I think the theater for me has really catapulted me above and beyond my peers in the sense of being able to just pick something up from scratch and read it to an audience, or be able to present a product like on my insurance side of the business, be able to present a product in a more fun, tangible way where I could paint a picture, and this comes very natural to me. And I think the last thing I'll say, and I want to throw it back to you, is in theater, and you know this as a magician, we're constantly making decisions and having to trust our instincts and trust our abilities. We have to say, this is how I think this line is going to be read, and this is my instinct in it, and this is my thoughts on it, and this is how I'm going to put it out there. Yeah. And we have to live with the decision of how the audience is going to receive it, how the manager is going to receive it. And so what I'm interested in terms of your magician background is, as a performer, how have you seen that translate over to your life as, the chairman of this huge hotel organization?
So I would say this, Michael. I think that when you work in the casino world, or you work in cruise ships, or you work in nightclubs or whatnot, you're constantly called upon. Yes, you have your set shows and your schedules and whatnot, but there were always surprises. Hey, we've got a VIP on board. They're having a birthday party, and we want you to do something special for them in their group. Or we've got a corporate group upstairs that's got a hospitality suite, a couple hundred people. We want you to go entertain them for a while. And it's a constant, and as you know, things happen on stage that you're not expecting either, for sure. I think that made, how do I put it? It helped me build my chutzpah muscle on stage, of just kind of go with it and smile and try to think of funny anecdotes along the way if something's different. But I think it kind of prepared me for almost any situation, for sure. It helped me early on in even the Marines. I mean, I used to tell people, Marines are half theater. If you think about the ceremony and the nomenclature, I was going to say, you think about the uniform and the ceremonial aspects of it, and the nomenclature of vocabulary in the Marine Corps. Everything's kind of predetermined, but we put on a great show in the Marines. I mean, the dress blues, I always felt super sexy in my dress blues. But it's also something where you're leading a group of people. I was a platoon leader for a while, and I guess all of those talents over the years, not just the performing, but also in the Marines of dealing with people, have helped me through the years.
Yeah, like you said, in the service, there is, like you said, the nomenclature, in that there's that theater element to it. Of course, there's the real element to it all. And so I'm interested in that as well in terms of your Marines, your service experience. The challenges that you had to overcome there, how those have also helped you in what you do today.
Yeah, I will say this: it took away any fear of jumping into anything. The risk muscle was gone. for sure. I no longer worried about risk. Coming from, like I said, I wasn't exactly a studly in high school sports guy, and to be thrown into boot camp at Paris Island was a big deal. And it took a lot of fight on my part to get up to speed in terms of running and the athleticism that was necessary, but also the discipline of controlling myself, my mind, my emotions throughout that process was a huge learning experience. And I found, I would say, my inner strength. I was fearless after that. I was ready to take on anything. Few things scared me. I'll give you a great example. When I left the Marines, I had been in, between full-time and reserves, total 6 years. All right. Everybody was like, "Why are you leaving the Marines to do magic? What are you thinking?" Because another 14 years, you could retire from the Marines, and you'd still be young and you could do other things. And I was like, yeah, but I've done my time, I've served, and I'm ready to do this magic. And when I literally picked up and went to LA, and I described this in the book, and eventually auditioned at the Magic Castle, got a gig, got an agent, one thing leads to another. But I wasn't fearful because in the back of my mind, I knew I was still young enough and in shape enough to come back to the Marines if I needed to. Within a year or two, I could probably re-up. Then when I did the magic for 15 years and decided to make the pivot to hotel consulting, again, I wasn't all that fearful, Michael, because I realized if I have to, I'll go grab my costumes and props and, promotional materials that I was fearful of throwing away. I just held on to everything just in case. But luckily for me, I never had to go back and open any of those boxes or crates and pick that up again. But I certainly wasn't fearful of failure. I will say I was more excited by the challenge and the opportunity in front of me, and that was huge. And I give myself a lot of credit through all of that to stop thinking about risk. In fact, I have a saying that I share with people, and it's be open in all things, be lucky in all things. So many people, you give them suggestions or you give them advice, and they immediately they're like, "Nah, I'm not going to do that," or they discount it without absorbing it. And I think that's a mistake. I have done so many things where somebody just kind of tossed an idea out, including becoming a hotel consultant. It wasn't a natural leap for me to get into hotel consulting, but I had a magic friend. It was a groupie. He used to come see me perform a lot, and he was well-to-do. And he invited me to his home, a ship docked in Baltimore, essentially. He lived in Baltimore. And he invited me to his office and his home, and we got his new beautiful Jag, and we drove to his house in the hills outside of Baltimore, and I met his lovely wife and his kids and his dog, and we had a gorgeous dinner. And at the end of it, we're sitting around drinking whiskeys. Everybody's gone to bed. And he said, "So where are you headed?" I'm like, "Well, big surprise. I'm headed back down to the Caribbean tomorrow." And he's like, "I would give anything to have your life." And I'm like, "Are you serious? Like, I would give anything to trade places with you right now. Let you go, and I'll stay with your family." And he said, "You could do what I do. You have a great deal of talent, and that's what drives you in the magic. But what I do, you could do." And honestly, I believed him. And 2 months later is when I had given up the magic and opened an office. If I flash forward to another example of that risk reward, be open in all things, be lucky in all things. I would say a year or two into my consulting career, I was at a conference in New York, an industry conference. And I met this lovely Irish chap named Alex Gibson, who was a professor at university at the hotel school in Dublin. And we kept finding ourselves at the same breakouts at conference and standing in line to meet the same speakers. And finally I looked at him and I'm like, "Who the heck are you?" And we became friends. And he invited me shortly thereafter to come to Ireland to lecture to one of his classes, and then subsequently an association lecture. So I had a nice weekend in Dublin, but he was taking me on a tour around the city center, and we passed his campus building behind the Gresham Hotel in Dub. And he said, there's the school. And I said, well, I would have really loved to have gone to college. I think it would help me with my consulting career, and I feel like I missed an opportunity. And he said, well, you could probably, with your accolades and experience and the clients that you've worked on, you might apply for just a postgrad, and they might take you. And I thought, really? He's like, yeah. He said, it doesn't happen a lot, but you never know. It's worth a shot. So I came home and I made 3 boxes, handmade boxes. I put work product in there, articles, letters of reference from various associations, some letters from different schools where I had lectured, with my high school transcript, an application and a check. I got into 3 different schools at master's level. And obviously I chose Ireland in deference to, well, they like Americans and they have Guinness. It's pretty simple.
That's awesome.
They speak English. So, but I applied to 3 different country schools, I would say, to get out of the U.S. And I picked up and moved to Ireland and got my first postgrad and ended up getting a second, my Master's of Science in Hospitality Management. Had it not been for that passing comment from Alex, I don't know that I would have that today. And I think that's a really good example of why you need to be open to things that come your way, and not just knock them down and say, yeah, no, that's not for me. Think about it.
I love staying on the topic of mindset, because that's really what you're talking about here, is having this open mindset. And so I'm curious, was it a natural thing for you to always have this open mindset to things coming your way, or was it something that you had to learn and become?
I think it developed over my childhood, and I think the difference between growing up in little town in North Georgia, where I was rafting and fishing and a lot of, I would say, local people doing local activities, and it still is, and it's gorgeous. I love it. I get a fried apple pie and apple cider is like manna from heaven when I go back to North Georgia. But when when I go back and look at what the difference was living in Egypt, where we're going to a restaurant on the Nile, we're eating pigeon, grilled pigeon, which most Americans are like, what? And I'm like, well, these aren't your normal pigeons, but they grill them and they dump them on newspaper in front of you like crabs, and they're amazing. Or, fishing in the Mediterranean for sea urchins and eating them fresh, or going with my grandfather to some, as a child, they used to buy me these horrible, I would say today horrible, but think Christian Dior, jacket, vest, and knee-high shorts with knee socks and dress shoes to go with my grandfather to his business meetings. It was quite different than what I would wear back in Georgia. Ted Nugent concert,
right?
Shirt and striped jeans. But I think it was something that I learned as a child all the way up because of the 2 worlds that I lived in.
Right.
And it was interesting.
The contrast gave you the opportunity to have this open mind. You almost had to have this open mind, otherwise you'd end up rejecting one or the other. But in order to absorb both, which were so different, you had to have this open mindset.
Sure. And honestly, it's not something that I thought about a lot. I think it's just something that I acquired. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that it was different from what I would say most people's mindset is until later on in my adult life, for sure. But I was always quick my first day on the radio at WLEJ, I was so excited and nervous, and 4 hours on the radio for the first time, and not a lot of help. Quite honestly, there's one other guy in the station that was a sales guy when I was there typically. So I was kind of on my own to spin records and take phone calls, and you just figure out the board. I mean, that's what you're doing right now, Michael.
I've been taught the board back here, and and it's got a lot of buttons, and it's very overwhelming. But once you learn the ones that you're supposed to press, you're like, all right, I got this. And then when you have to troubleshoot something, you go, all right, I don't got this.
Absolutely. I know that feeling.
again, just back to this whole mindset, and I love this because, I've been speaking a lot in my talks about the open mindset and the fixed mindset. And so I really love how you really shared how the contrast of your upbringing really helped push you towards an open mindset without even knowing it. And I think the same is true for a lot of people who are in a closed or in a fixed mindset, in that their upbringing kind of brings them there. But the great part that I think we learn and that as a leader is that you can change. You can become a fixed mindset. You can look at your failures and the things that have stopped you from achieving your goals and say, you know what, I'm not going to try anymore, and you can go to a fixed. And then the same is true if you're in a fixed mindset of everything, and say, I can become more, and I can try more, and I can be open to more. So I love that statement that you make. And so because you were open to so many suggestions, you got into the hotel industry. And in the hotel industry, you've been there for so long. Before we jumped on, I was telling you about articles I read about you that are over a decade old, where you were interviewed by these different magazines and these different publications and bloggers and all the rest. And so you've made quite a career there by having this mindset, which has also gotten you to the point of writing this book that you're putting out there, this newly revised edition, to becoming a keynote and sought out speaker. So I want to go into your hotel experience with that in mind, of having this open mindset, the stories that have, brought you to where you were in the hotel industry, and you're still in the hotel consulting industry. So share a little bit about what you do there and how you're leading your teams in this hotel consulting agency that you're in or part of.
Sure. And with your permission, I'm going to take a couple steps back.
Of course.
But essentially, it's been a long journey, Michael, and it's one that I couldn't have made without what I call the power of personal branding and utilizing that fully. But when I decided to become a consultant, it was like, for the third time in my life, I had to think, I would say rethink my personal brand from Marine, where we talked about, sameness, think sameness, uniform haircut, vocabulary, to magician, think mysterious, lots of black, hair highlights, eye makeup, and rhinestone tuxedos. Wow. To this conservative consultant, business suits, ties, and dress shoes. But more importantly, I had to rethink things behaviorally, meaning from a personal brand standpoint, the Marines was get up before, at 0:30 in the morning and run 10 miles or more before the day was done, to Magic Boy, that's what I call it, where you slept all day and you did 2 shows a night, 6 days a week, and then you went out after work very late with a raucous crowd, to this road warrior traveling 9 to 5, let's call it a hotel consultant. But each of those steps, I also had to rethink my personal value system. From Marine to, let's say, magician wasn't probably the most healthy period of my life. From a going out decision-making standpoint, but to conservative, reputation is everything consultant. But I did. But once I made that pivot, I basically approached the personal branding the same way that I had in previous lives. For example, I became a member, got heavily involved in professional associations. I think that's key. Only this time, instead of the Society of American Magicians and the International Brotherhood of Magicians, it was the Hospitality Sales and Marketing Association International, which I joined in the mid-90s. I became a very involved member, got on committees, eventually the board, and I spent 4 years as global chairman of HSMAI's International Foundation. At the time, we had about 8,600 members. I got invited to join the prestigious International Society of Hospitality Consultants, which is invitation-only vetted organization. And once again, I became an active member, got on the board, and eventually became global chairman of the International Society of Hospitality Consultants. Diligently to acquire industry-recognized. I also worked diligently to acquire industry-recognized designations, certifications, and awards. And like you saw, I started writing for the trade pubs in a big way, and even, what I would call mainstream interviews with USA Today or ABC or CBS, Wall Street Journal, which was interesting. But this time I'm writing articles instead of Magic Magazine, which I wrote for years and was contributing editor, or The Illusionist. I was writing for hotels and Hotel News Now. And finally, I ended up getting the postgrads. And all of that, I think, has led to where I am today. I've worked my way up the industry to become global chairman today of one of the world's largest hotel, tourism, and leisure advisory firms, Horwath HTL. So I'm pretty proud of that fact. But again, I could have never done it. And I still, if I'm really honest with you and your viewers or listeners, Michael, I would tell you, I still don't have all the answers. And I still feel like I have miles to go before I achieve my long-term brand goals, my personal brand goals. But I think I've learned a lot along the way. And in the book, I have much to share on the topic as it relates to personal branding.
Yeah, I like how you broke the personal branding down into 3 different kind of buckets of rethinking not just our thoughts, but also our behaviors and our values. And I think that's so important, because our behaviors can sometimes dictate our thoughts, but we also know that our values really dictate everything in terms of our thoughts and our behaviors. If you really, if you get down to it, your values are really what drive you to do anything, or what will motivate you to do anything. When we think about, how do you get motivated to go to the gym, or how do you get motivated to go on a diet or lose weight, or how do you get motivated to work? The motivation can come in all sorts of forms of goal setting and all this other stuff. But at the base of it all, it's your values. What are you valuing? Are you valuing your health? Are you valuing your finances? Are you valuing the people you work with? And once you get down to that and your values, now you're the way that you think and the way that you behave is completely changed. So I really love how you break it down into those 3 buckets. I also want to mention that as the global chair, something that I want to mention to everybody listening here, this is a over 100-year firm, and we have over 250 senior consultants that are working in over 60 offices and more than 50 countries. So this isn't like small time stuff here. For me, when I read a little bit about you and I saw that, I was just like, all right, who am I having on here? Is he flying in on a corporate jet and rolling in on his Rolls Royce? Tell us a little bit about the lifestyle and what you've experienced from the people that you've met and the people that you've worked with, and being able to really, I think, straddle between the customer and your end user of the client experience of the person coming in and using a hotel, and also consulting with these these hotels where you have that upper echelon. How are you able to make it to where everybody feels that they're being taken care of?
So it's a great question, Michael. But I would tell you, for me, the great joy of being with Horwath HTL are my fellow members and associates and colleagues within Horwath HTL. They're amazing. Every time I meet a new group of people within Horwath HTL, which hopefully has come to a conclusion after a few years being global chair, I am so impressed with their backgrounds and the way they treat and respect one another and the kinds of clients that they're working on. I feel very proud and honored to work with them wherever they are. A lot of these people have been working in the industry as advisors for 30, 40 years, and they have emotional maturity and education. And I would say we've seen that solve that kind of thinking, which I'm learning from. I have a global committee or board that represents Asia, Europe, LATAM, and North America, and they're amazing. They provide a great level of senior level advice, expertise, and maturity from a leadership standpoint, and they tend to put up safety rails for me and help guide where we're going, but we make decisions collectively, so that makes it easy. From a client perspective, I'm very happy to tell you that we work with independent small boutique hotels, from concept to repositioning to transactional advice to very large hotels and hotel brands, management companies. So we can provide strategic direction and advice, feasibility or market study kind of activities. But I mean, more recently, just to give you an idea, we just finished, and very few companies can do this. And I think it's two things. One is we're focused exclusively on the hotel, tourism, and leisure space as it relates to real estate investment, because really hotels and resorts, casinos are more or less real estate investments, plays more than anything. And because we focus on it only in comparison to like other good companies like CBRE or JLL, some of those larger companies who are, they do every industry type, retail, office, the whole mix. We're focused exclusively in that area. But because we're global and we do have a very senior level of expertise, and we don't do brokerage. So while we do provide some real estate expertise, we don't do brokerage. Like, we're not buying and selling your hotels, so to speak. I think that keeps us independent. But for instance, a very large brand came to me and said, "Hey, John, can you guys develop a global strategy for all of our brands for the next 5 years that would be broken down by geography and other players and investors and whatnot?" And it was almost a 2-year assignment, essentially, but it really paid people at conferences from that company, and they're like, so what?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is that it's funny because I meet people from that company at industry conferences, and they're like, "We are following your plan to the letter and enjoying it," and that makes me feel good, but and proud. But we could only do that because of our people on the ground with full knowledge and relationships in all of those other countries. But essentially, it ended up being a 2-part, 7-figure consulting assignment, and that allowed us to compete with the McKinseys of the world and others, who are another great firm. McKinsey's a great firm, but it's fun to compete with those big boys, particularly in our HTL space specifically. But I enjoy it. My game plan within Horwath is just try to get everybody together. I mediate of our offices and backgrounds of our people. I was gonna say, if you think about the diversity and the backgrounds of our people and where they come from culturally, politically, economically, every country has their own situation, and particularly as it relates to real estate, regulations from governments. It's pretty interesting. So my job is really to mediate between all the parties and provide the best long-term strategy and implementation for us as a group. That's my primary goal.
And all of this has really taken you to the finish line, or at least maybe the starting line of being an author, to be able to put out this book of going from invisible to icon, how to become a known expert in your industry. So I'm curious on how everything that we've just discussed has led to you writing and essentially rewriting your updated edition now, this book that you put out there, because I'm hearing a lot of similarities. I didn't read the book, obviously, but I'm hearing a lot of similarities just in the title itself. That's why I wanted to mention the title here in what you do in your day-to-day and what you're writing about.
Sure. I mean, what prompted me to write the book before was I was a solo practitioner, Michael, and I was used to being kind of solo as a magician, so it made sense for me to be a solo practitioner. And I'm not sure anybody of merit or worth talking about would have hired me when I first started, having no experience or education in the industry. So it was kind of my only conduit into the industry. But the first edition of this book kind of talked about how I built that practice and the learnings from the Marines to Magic Boy to solo practitioner. This new revised and expanded edition I wanted to write for two reasons. One was 11 more, almost 12 years had passed in between the first writing and this one, and much has changed in the industry, but also with me professionally. And I learned a lot more about personal branding through that time period as well. But think about how COVID affected the world and even what's going on geopolitically. I mean, when the book was sent to the publisher, I would say our conflict in the Middle East had already started, and I mention it in the book. Obviously, the war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine was in full swing. But it also discusses, most importantly, I guess, proof of concept. One of the things that really made me write the first book was the events of 9/11 and how I watched all these senior level consultants in our industry who had very strong, well-known brands make a fortune while I was like surviving, on the vine, shriveling up. And my goal was to become this known expert so that in the future, I would be on the list of people that people would call when they're in trouble or they need real help. And that was the reason I wrote the first book. This book, I honestly think, was proof of concept for me because I survived COVID. I didn't just survive, I thrived during COVID. I was on the list. I made the list. I got a lot of work through that. But I talk about that, and I also talk about my decision to leave as a solo practitioner and start, with Horwath HTL. And that was driven, again, everybody wants to know why. Okay, I get your thinking, but why? I think that's the essence of any good story is why. So I was watching, I mentioned the International Society of Hospitality Consultants and that I was global chair, but that was really just an organization that still today is chock full of experts and mentors that I was tapping into early on. And over the years, I was watching a lot of these guys that were solo practitioners retire, and they were kind of licking their wounds privately with me about the fact that, for instance, when my good friend and colleague David Brudney of Brudney and Associates retired, he basically got nothing except what he put away in his retirement account. Because when David Brudney leaves David Brudney and Associates, the practice isn't worth much. There's no cash out.
Right.
There's none of that. There's no special moment where you get a check at the end. And I watched that happen to a few of my dear friends and colleagues, and I thought to myself, maybe I need to rethink as an entrepreneur and a professional that instead of building a lifestyle company, which mine was, I had a great lifestyle, I was making good money, and I didn't have a lot of headaches except with a few clients at a time, to more of an asset-driven enterprise. Mm-hmm. So I bought all three books on how to, maneuver from a lifestyle-driven company to an asset-driven one and reposition. That was the only three that I could find on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or anywhere else. But I read them, and every single book that I picked up, the classic mistakes that they tell you do not do, I was making daily, every single one. And I was really frustrated because I was very proud of my business. John Free Consulting, I was very proud of it and my brand. But the more I read, the more I realized I had been wandering down the wrong path for far too long if I was going to enjoy some kind of event where I got a buyout. So I made the decision to pivot, and that's in the book, and it's explained and how I did it. And I'm very happy that I did, because it's been 8 years ago that I made that pivot.
Two questions here, and I think you could answer both of them in your flow, which is one, what are the three books? And two, what were the three mistakes that you made?
Yeah, you'd have to pause it and let me go grab the books. But
Oh, okay. No worries. We'll get back to that. That'll be in the show notes.
okay, I'll give it to you in the show notes for sure. And what was the other one? What were the mistakes?
And what
that
were
I
the
made?
mistakes that you were making daily? Yeah.
So the mistakes I was making daily was all of my investment from my company was not focused on reinvestment in the company because it was just me and an executive assistant at the time. It was really focused on my S-Class Mercedes and my beautiful home and my all of the lifestyle, my Armani suits and the packaging, what I would call my brand packaging as a solo practitioner. So I had to make some tough decisions. I had a beautiful watch collection, which I ended up selling, all the fine watches. I got rid of my Mercedes and bought a Honda Accord. I put myself on a small salary, and I really had to make a hard pivot. And as I sit here today, I can tell you that I've rebuilt the company. And yeah, okay, I drive a nice Mercedes today, and I do have a nice watch. But if you read the book, it's a client gift. I got a Rolex as a client gift from my client, and I wear it proud. It's like my wedding band. I won't take it off because it's such a great gift.
It means something to you. Well, you did something which is something that we don't realize is such a step forward, which is you took this huge step back. You took this huge step, several, but even like this tangible step back in the sense of trading in a Mercedes for a Honda and getting rid of your watches and taking a decrease in your salary in order to further progress, to be able to leap forward. And that's, that speaks to character, but that also speaks to what you were talking about earlier of willing to take a risk. You didn't know if this was going to work. You just read 3 books on it. You didn't know if selling in your S-Class was going to guarantee you financial freedom for the future. It's still it's an interesting thing to call it a gamble to trade in a Mercedes for a Honda, but it really is a gamble because now we go into what you just said. Your packaging, your brand packaging of who you are as you roll up to a meeting, and it's like, hey, John, is everything okay?
Yeah. No, and that's true. That was true. I encountered that, and I would have to explain that I'm making a pivot. Here's what I'm trying to do. The biggest part of that, Michael, though, was the emotional toll, because I had worked so hard to build the John Fareed brand and logo and I would say stories around that brand, and to leave that brand and take my name off the business and join another business that was a legacy business with their own logo and branding and stories was huge. It was a massive toll. My business cards, you'll appreciate this. My business cards were letterpress on crane paper, European cut. Just you hand it to people and they're like, oh my God, is this a coaster or a business? Are you sure it's just, it was impressive. And to pick up somebody else's business card that, it's nice. I'm not complaining, with somebody else's logo and business name was a shock to the system. But I had to there you go. I love you, man. That's it right there. I get it. So I knew you would get this, Michael. I knew you would get it.
For our audio listeners, I just shared with him my business card. I got the thick one too. And my reasoning was very similar to yours in terms of the personal branding, in that I wanted it so that when someone receives it, they don't just toss it. They receive it and they go, this is something of value. And so I always joke with people and I say, if you throw out my business card, you're throwing out a tree. So, save a tree, keep my business card.
So I have to tell you, I revived all of those items. I just had them reprinted as my author keynote business. So it's not Horwath; it's separate from Horwath. But I was on a meeting call yesterday, and the guy said, "Hey, you sent me your book," and he said, "And I'm going to read it on the flight that I'm doing, this weekend. I'm taking this weekend." I was like, "Great." He says, "But the letter that you sent me with your business card, I felt the paper, and I opened it up, and I saw that it was letterpress in that business card you had." He said that I was like, "Now I have to get to know this guy, and I have to read his book." And I do think that's a big part of it. But I would say, while I appreciate what you said about taking some steps back, I think I'm in a much better position. I think 3 steps back, 20 steps forward, quite honestly, what is the game. But it was also the emotional toll of, I've talked to several people who said, I could never leave my company name and my logo for somebody else's. I don't know how you did that. And I'm like, it's all a matter of where do you want to go and how do you want to get there, for sure.
And I think, like you said, you addressed it in the book. So, so everybody, you're going to have to get your hands on a copy here. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on a copy. But it's also knowing why you're doing it. It's leaving everything that you're doing. From financial to emotional standpoint, there has to be a bigger purpose and a big reason why. If you're happy with where things are at, if you're happy with your name on it, and you're happy with the way things are going, then that's great. Then there's no reason to make that change. But for you, there was a bigger, deeper reason, and I think for you, it was that event, seeing that gentleman, leave the organization, and the only thing he had to count on was his 401k, and for you, that wasn't good enough.
No, and I knew my ticker was, the time was running out on my career as well, and I only had so many years to really make this change if I was going to do it. I would tell you too, Michael, much of the decisions, those 3 steps back that we talked about, were also emotional. A Honda Accord, I got a new one that was loaded and it was beautiful. I was very happy with that car. And instead of my watch collection at the time, I was wearing an iWatch, which was fine. I thought it was kind of cool. I'm like, well, this does so much more than my old, Cartier or Rolex. It seems more practical. But I will tell you, it made for interesting conversations. So I'm sitting on a private jet with a client who's a billionaire, long-term client, and he was a big fan of Cartier. And he used to always ask me which Cartier I was wearing. And we were on his plane, and he goes, "Where's your Cartier?" And I'm like, "Well, I sold all my watches." And he's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "I sold them all." And he's like, "For what?" And I'm like, "Well, not all of us are billionaires, and I needed the money, and I can't believe how much I got for these used watches." And I put the money in the bank, and I bought this guy. And he's like, "That's not a watch. That's a toy." I'm like, "Well, it works. It works for me." And he goes, "No, but John, in your place in life, you should have a gentleman's timepiece." And I was like, "Well, I appreciate that, but maybe one day I'll get another one." But I'm out. And I told him, I said, I even sold my Mercedes, and I'm driving a Honda Accord now. And he's like, "Should I fill your head? Are you sure you're okay?" It was that sort of thing.
Gasp.
Interestingly enough, we finished a meeting, and we go to dinner. It was wrap up of an assignment, and I go to my hotel room, and it's late, and I'm exhausted, and I notice that there's this hospitality presentation of a tray and a bottle of wine and all of that with a card in a box, and I go to open the card, and it's from this client, and on it he said, "Here's a classic traveler for a classic traveler. Thanks for everything you did for us this year." And I look at the box, and it's a green Rolex box, and I open it up, and it was this watch. And I was literally dumbfounded. Like, he decided that I needed it so badly, he was going to buy it for me because it bothered him that much. But that was years ago, and I'm still wearing this. I can't take it off, but somehow or another. And I have to tell you, on the flight back on his jet, he asked me what time it was like 3 times. Yeah, But the funniest thing was, because we were there with some of his people, and I said, "I just want to remind you that I also sold my Mercedes for a Honda Accord." And he looked at me and says, "I'm not buying you a damn Mercedes." But I thought, hey, it's worth the try, Michael. It was worth the try.
Oh, man. Well, the good news is the watch will last longer than the Mercedes. So
this is true, and hold its value better, for sure.
Yeah. So he got you the right investment, I think.
Yeah. No, I'm pleased, and he's still a client today. So I'm super pleased about that.
That's such a cool story of sticking to your vision for yourself, and also having the confidence in that, sticking to it in terms of sharing a story with this person. You could have played it so many different ways, and you could have, hid behind some sort of, whatever you wanted to make, some sort of story that you could have made up about your business. But you told them exactly why and what you were doing. I think that honesty showed him, that you are somebody of value. And for him, he wanted to express it in the way of a gift, which I think is wonderful and very generous on his end. But I think really what, in terms of the story that I heard you share there, it's for everybody listening, the learning to me is when you're true to yourself and you share that with others, people who really understand it and who it resonates with will appreciate that about you. It's not about the Mercedes for him. It wasn't about the watch collection for him. It was about you as the person. And so even stripped away from all of that, he still saw value in you. And I think that that's my big takeaway from your story is he still saw value in you, and he wanted to shower you with a gift, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
No. And it was a treasure, and I still treasure the relationship. But that goes back to my grandpa's whole theory about the importance of long-standing relationships, building and maintaining relationships. And that's been a great thing, a great lesson for me, because today it seems like so many of us just throw away relationships without thinking about it. And it could happen for any number of reasons, but I think relationships are the most valuable thing we own in this world.
Yeah. And I want to also say too about in terms of value, in terms of relationships, is that building relationships on value, that story also epitomizes the fact that you built that relationship on value, not on perception. And so I know that, in terms of your book and in terms of everything that you do, we talk a lot about personal branding, and you speak about it in all different ways. And of course, personal branding, like you said, you were a consultant, you had a conservative consultant, and you had to wear a suit and shoes and timepiece and all this other stuff and have to have this brand. And I think brand image is very important, and I'm sure you'll attest to that. But at the core of it all, it has to have value. And I think, again, this story that you just shared proves that in this relationship, it wasn't about all of those things. It was about the value that you brought to the relationship and understanding that relationships work two ways.
Exactly.
The client brings you value and you bring the client value. It works two ways.
It does. I mean, can we talk a little bit about personal branding?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's get into it.
So a lot of people hear personal branding, but I've come to understand that they don't really know what it is. They think they know, but they don't. But I've defined it. If we go back to corporate branding or product and services branding, personal branding has a process, just like every type of positioning. And it's one that I outline in the book. But essentially, I've defined personal branding as the crafting and management of your identity so that it stimulates meaningful, precise ideas or perceptions about who you are, Michael, what you do, and more importantly, what you stand for. I always tell people that if you have any goals or dreams for your life, then you have a personal brand today. You just may not be managing it to its best value, or even developing and managing it to its highest value. And if you don't believe me, go ask your partner or spouse or family or even colleagues at work to describe your personal brand, and they will tell you. That should make some people nervous. But I think about it from this standpoint. If you're in business at all today, it's more important than ever because we live in this knowledge-based economy where we're making decisions about one another in an instant based on our own observations and experiences with people and society in general. I mean, think about it. When you're standing in line at Starbucks, how quickly you judge somebody, or walking through the airport or going to a meeting or a conference. It's just human nature, and we all do it. So there's no reason to feel guilty about it. But I think it's very, very important to your perceived value in the world that you establish and manage your brand based upon what we talked about, your personal values, your key attributes, your leading traits, and the messaging that you want to communicate about yourself to the rest of the world. So I would tell people if they wanted to start this process, we could narrow it down to 4 key steps. And again, this is classic branding. And first is 4 key attributes. And this is where you think about your own, and this is difficult. What are Michael's, Mr. Esposito's key attributes? What is it that you bring to the table from a personal standpoint and a professional standpoint? Make a list of them and lead it. I would say bring it down to 4 words. And that's a difficult, it's no easy task, but it's worthwhile, and it helps you define what your personal brand is. I'll give you an example. If I were to say, I'm thinking of a female icon that we all know, and I said she's organized, she's creative, she's anal, and she's intimidating, almost everyone goes, oh, you're talking about Martha Stewart. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Imagine how powerful it would be, Michael, if someone could mention 4 words and everybody knew, oh, you're talking about Michael Esposito. It would be hugely powerful. But like I said, it's the first kind of baseline that you have to kind of do a self-inventory and figure out what 4 words would I hope one day people would use to describe me, right? That's one. The next step is to think about your brand packaging, which we were talking about with clothes and watches and all of that. But it's important that people take an inventory, again, an honest inventory of how people might perceive them and their clothing, accessories, jewelry, hair, makeup, glasses or contacts, fragrance even, tattoos and piercings. What are they? Where are they? And what the heck do they mean? But even the car you drive or your workspace or office and the home you live in all shape perceptions about you. And that's always my first question. Are you happy with your brand packaging today? Do you have like a signature look? Are there things that you would like to change? And we can all think of people that have well-known, well-defined brand presence, because I can name things and images come to mind like Adele or Bono or Carrot Top, a comedian, or Guy Fieri, The Rock, RuPaul. They all have very, very well-defined personal brand presence that has helped them achieve great success. Even Dog the Bounty Hunter has a well-defined brand that has served him well. So that's the second step, is to sit down and think to yourself quietly, because this is personal, about how you package yourself and how others might perceive that if you want to make any changes. And then the next step that I would share, the third step before we get to the end, is essentially a brand description. Just like any brand, if you're a soda, a beer, a car company, whatever it might be, you would have a 1 or 2 paragraph brand description. And I encourage people to write a paragraph or 2 that describes who they are. And that means your sex, your age, your nationality or ethnicity, your education, your religion, sexual preference. Are you married or single? Do you have kids? Are you a parent? Because that all defines who you are and only who you are. And next is what you do. Yeah, it's your profession, but can you dig a little deeper and talk about exactly what you do? Because not all there's a lot of accountants, but there's a lot of different kinds of accountants, the clients that you serve, and then what you do from a professional associations, social and civic organizations, your talents and hobbies. Yeah, are you a singer, a musician, a speaker, whatever it may be, or from a hobby standpoint, maybe you play pickleball or golf or whatever. But that's who you are, and I would include that because that's very defining. And then finally is the hard part, and that's where you sit down and talk about what I would call your leading traits. This is your values. What are your top 3 or 4 values that you value most? What are your strengths? What are you honestly really, really good at? What is your manner and style like? Are you timely or are you always late? Is that your reputation? And should you change that? Or maybe you're always early. My wife and I are always 15 minutes early, and it annoys the hell out of everybody because they're like, yes, you're invited to our dinner party, but it starts at 6:30, not 6:15. So it's our habit. But it's essentially your presence, and you just write a paragraph or 2 And then finally, you come to the end, which is where I talk about your personal brand mission statement, Michael. And this is very simple, but this is kind of the culmination of that exercise, and as I describe it in the book, where you take those 4 words, those key attributes, you combine it with your thoughts about your brand packaging or presence and how you want to present yourself. I'm kind of bougie. It's a joke in the industry. And that, I guess, paragraph or 2 about yourself, that's your brand description, and you pull in your long-term goals about how you want to position yourself. And it's not just about business. It's how do you wish to position yourself in the minds of your spouse or partner, your kids, the rest of your family, your colleagues at work, your clients and customers, your community in general, and maybe even your industry. And that becomes your touchstone for all your decision making. Like, if I buy this, if I get this tattoo, if I buy this house, or I drive this car, or I decide to wear this kind of suit, or whatever, all the decision making becomes very, very easy. But more importantly, what I was going to say is, more importantly, Michael, it helps you with your value system from a decision making and behavior standpoint. Does this go with my personal brand? Because if you think about any brand, there's 3 elements that people need to remember. One is commitment. You have to commit fully to your brand, whatever brand it is, and make sure that everything you do supports and confirms that brand. So it is a strong commitment. If I suddenly showed up at a conference and I had my nose pierced and a tattoo on my forehead, and I was wearing a wife beater with a beard and mustache, I wouldn't look as good as you, Michael. But people would, people would have a lot of questions about what's going on with John, for sure. So commitment matters. The other thing is investment, and I talk about this in the book a bit, but you have to invest in everything that you can do to lift up and push forward your brand. So joining professional and social and civic organizations, becoming involved, taking on leadership roles, speaking and writing, earning designations, continuing your education, anything that you can do that lifts up and push forward your brand. And then finally is that consistency thing that we were talking about just now, where you have to make sure that everything remains consistent throughout your life with your family, your spouse, your kids, everybody. Because when you do things that are inconsistent, or you have behavior that's inconsistent, it harms your brand. You lose trust in your personal brand. Because we can think of icons that have kind of tarnished their brand with what I would call off-brand behavior. Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, well-known public figures having problems. More recently, even Lance Armstrong, but more recently, it's Kanye West and Will Smith with that Oscar slap, where people are raising questions about personal brand. But that's the idea. If anybody's curious as to what personal branding is, I hope I've whetted their appetite to the idea of, hey, maybe this would be fun exercise for me to get involved in. But it certainly makes moving up in your industry and even in your social circles a lot easier. In my opinion, it's like a guiding light to help you achieve your next step.
I think you really gave us a nice deep dive, and I want to talk on a couple things, but just like you said, in terms of the personal branding piece of the actions that you make, and you brought up the Will Smith slap, and I think you see Mike Tyson is a revived career, and a lot of it has to do with his personal brand of who he was and who he is today. And so Mike Tyson can actually slap somebody and it doesn't affect his personal brand because of the brand that he's created around himself. Whereas Will Smith is in contrast to him, creating a wholesome brand and then slaps someone out of anger or frustration or whatever it was, not just someone, Chris Rock, and it affects his brand negatively. And it's really because of this. How did you build your brand? And one more example to kind of highlight all of this for everyone is you think of Snoop Dogg, the rapper, who can go on national television with a blunt smoking weed on camera on TV. Everybody accepts it for what it is and accepts him for who he is, and he gets commercial advertisement and all the rest. And then you could think of, just put in the pop celebrity, really it's who it's going to be. If God forbid they were caught with some sort of marijuana joint or a bowl or something like that, all of their brands, all of their sponsors would drop them in a heartbeat because of the brand that they've built and created.
You're spot on. I mean, it's just like, and you can see recovery. I mean, Tiger Woods recovered from
Martha Stewart
brain damage from Martha Stewart after she got out of. And look at and look, she's doing commercials with Snoop Dogg.
It just made me think of it, of like the play on how you can revive a brand. But I think, and I think you'll attest to this, and you can just jump on this bandwagon here. Is it's also, like you said, that commitment to the brand. So Martha Stewart could have tried to go back to her, like you said, you used the word anal, which I don't know if she'd appreciate or not appreciate, but she could have gone back to this conservative approach and dismissed what the truth and what happened. But instead, she acknowledged it, she took ownership of it, and she took ownership of it so much that she committed to it in a way that we as a society, we accept that. I think it's not that we accept what people do in terms of a negative behavior of maybe using drugs or going to white-collar prison or having street fights like Mike Tyson. It's not that we accept those behaviors. It's that we accept the person for acknowledging those behaviors and saying, hey, you know what? That's part of who I am. It might be part of my past or my history, and here is what I'm doing today.
It's true, and it goes back to, those are genuine, authentic, personal brands, and that's why we accept them. That we know that's really who they are. This is not some facade.
Right.
That's
gimmick.
Just who they are. Yeah, I mean, I've known Carrot Top for 32, 33 years.
I was going to ask about that one.
Or Scotty, I should say. So Scotty and I met years ago when I was Magic Boy. Like I said,
I had a feeling because he's a prop comic. I had a feeling you were going.
Yeah, so we met through this association, again, getting involved in associations called the National Association for Campus Activities. And this was an association where the kids at college that were on the committee to book all the entertainment for the year for the school would go to these conferences, and we would showcase. We would do our shows, and they would book us. And me and Carrot Top were kind of young guns, and we were both showcased, and we became friends. But I have to tell you, his name's Scotty. Scotty, or Carrot Top, has been in Vegas now. I mean, always in the top 5 acts for just the Luxor, 18 years. And before that, I think it was at the MGM for 10. And that red hair, and he's funny as all get out. No, I'm just saying, he's funny as all get out. But I'm telling you, Scotty, or Carrot Top, has a home down the street from me here in Orlando, and I see him. Scotty is the same person, whether he is on stage or off stage or in Vegas or in Orlando. And I can't tell you how many times I've hung out with him backstage. Not a lot, but a few. He wears the same clothes off the street onto stage, and then wears them off stage to go out. Because that's just who he is. So that's Carrot Top. And it's genuine and authentic, and he's stuck to it, and it's really helped him achieve some incredible success, honestly. I love him. He's a great guy. I'm going to see him in August, so looking forward to it.
And speak to this, because this comes up so often in terms of people talk about work-life balance. We talk about, we call it more harmony now. And, by having these consistencies of just what you just said, like using Carrot Top or Scotty as the example of, he's the same person on stage and off stage. Speak to how mentally this alleviates so much stress and imposter syndrome and all the rest by having this consistency.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think when you try to be all things to all people, you run into this situation where you end up being no one to anyone.
Mm.
It's not genuine. It's not authentic, and you can't dig in and get deep with people if you're not genuine, authentic. And I think when you present one face to your family and friends, and maybe colleagues at work or whatnot, and another one to prospects and clients and let's call it the media or whomever, I think you're quickly found out. And I think it erodes trust at home, meaning, imagine your kids or your spouse sees you. I don't understand. But it does the same with your colleagues.
Imagine your colleagues and spouse, you said?
Yeah, imagine your colleagues and clients if they see two versions of you and how they don't trust either one. I think that can be really, really iffy. I think you need to be yourself. You need to be authentic. You need to be genuine. And it doesn't matter, you go back and look at people like RuPaul, who really puts it all out there, or like I said, Dog the Bounty Hunter. We can come up with 1,000 success stories where that trueness, that genuineness, that authentic person has succeeded because they found their niche and they found their audience, and they've been true all the way through and consistent. And I think that's key. I think when you can't do that or don't do that, it's going to be very difficult for you to succeed long term, and particularly because I think people will find you out. Whether it's media or someone else. You can't do that.
And you'll find yourself out. I think that's where a lot of the nerves come from. I do a lot of trainings for leaders in terms of communications and public speaking and being able to speak on stages and everything. And that's where that harmony question comes in, is that so many of them, they're going, well, I'm nervous presenting. And I'm going, well, are you nervous talking to a friend? No, I'm not nervous talking to a friend. Are you nervous presenting to, a colleague? No. But why? What changes when you're on stage? And it's because now they're putting on this new persona. Now, the other thing that they're doing that you and I can see with someone is that they might be saying something to the colleague. They'll say a part of the presentation. They'll say, yeah, but this part, I think is BS. But on stage, they're fully bought in. And it's like, well, of course on stage you're fully bought in, and of course during that slide your nerves are through the roof because you don't believe it. You don't believe what you're saying. You have to trust what you're saying. And a quick little story on this that just happened to me recently. Part of what I speak on today in terms of leadership is trusting the people that you're leading, right? Having them, supporting them. Part of my whole talk culminates in support of your team. And it's supporting them in their decisions, meaning that you are trusting them to make a decision, you're allowing them to make that decision, and you're supporting them throughout the outcome, whether it's good or bad or indifferent. That's what true support looks like. It's not just, here's the decision, it went great, awesome, I'm supporting you because everything's good. It's also supporting them because they made the decision and it kind of went south. So that's true support. And so yesterday, my parents came to town, and my kids get out of school at 3:00, but the bus drops them off close to 4. My daughter has soccer practice that she had to leave at 5, and my parents made a 2-hour trip. So I'm going, Denise, I want to pick you up early so you could at least maximize the time with them, with your grandparents, of course, right? Now, Denise, right. I have 2 daughters, Denise and Tenley. Denise is on a I will not miss school for anything streak. She has not missed a day of school. She wants to get into the Guinness Book of World Records, she says. Okay. Right. So she will not miss school. Tenley is much like me. She'll look for any reason to leave school. So Tenley was easy. She was like, pick me up early. What are we leaving at lunch? I said, no, Tenley. We're going to leave at 3. So Denise is fighting me on this. And I'm trying to use all of my leadership techniques, right? I'm asking her open-ended questions. Well, how do you see the time that you would spend with them, being valuable if it's only an hour? Or how do you see this playing out? Or why is it so important to you to get in the Guinness Book of World Records? I'm doing all of this. But at the end of it, I'm making the mistake of, I know what I'm going to have her do. And that was a mistake, right? And so we get to that emotional point where I say, Denise, I'm going to pick you up at 3 with your sister. Be ready. I'm sending the email right now. And I see her look and the tears coming down her eyes. She goes, okay, Dad. And I'm about to send the email, and my daughter Tenley comes up to me. She's the emotional one who comes up to me and starts rubbing my back because she could see I'm getting a little angst in me. And I get that moment, that light bulb moment. And the light bulb moment wasn't parenting. The light bulb moment was stage for me. And I'm thinking of my talk, and I'm going, how could I speak to leaders about supporting their teams, giving them choices and allowing them to make the choices if I'm not doing that at home? And so I turned to Denise and I said, all right, Denise, you have 2 choices. You can take the bus or I'll pick you up, but with no consequence, with no making you feel bad. In other words, like, we're going to get ice cream and pizza when I pick you up, which is what I knew my parents were going to do with them.
A little compensation.
Right. But I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said with no consequence, which decision. And to make a longer story short, she chose to take the bus, and I told her, and she was upset. She was worried that I was going to be upset with her. And I said, Denise, I'm so proud of you for making the decision and for standing in your power. I say all of that, of course, to commend Denise and standing in her power. And I'm very proud of her for that. And we made a big deal about that because I really was proud of her for that. But also to say that I knew that when I get on stage and talk about leadership and talk about supporting your team, that if I would have gone the other way in my personal brand and told her what to do and just been the dad and been like, I'm sending the email out, that I would have been BSing my audience and I would have had some sort of nervous energy hit me on stage.
Yeah, no, I'm so proud of you. That you get a big gold star as a speaker, and 2 for being a great parent. So that's awesome.
I appreciate that. It was the selfish reason that I'm teaching everybody here of living in harmony in order to not have these nerves and have this imposter syndrome. And I'm also using this to tee up your speaking and your speaking career. You've spoken across the globe on stages, and you're really leveling up in your speaking career. And so I'm interested into what are you speaking on, and what do you see next in your speaking career?
So primarily what I speak on is really lately, I have to speak on industry issues at industry conferences, and I do a lot of that ad nauseum, but I enjoy it. I enjoy it very much, and it keeps me fresh and it keeps me on top of what's going on in the industry, because people don't want to hear from you if you're not up to speed and can't answer the hard questions. So it's a self-education process. It becomes self-fulfilling once you book a speech or they bring you in. And we sponsor a lot of conferences, so I get some slots. And I do try to give other members, Horwath HCL members, those opportunities. But in my speaking career, in terms of keynotes, it really is typically on 2 things. One is strategic planning and repositioning, whether it's a business or one of the things that I learned early on is how to take a failing asset, whether it's a hotel or a restaurant or a resort, and turn it around and make it successful, and the strategy that's involved in that. So I talk about strategic market planning, which is not necessarily marketing, but it is about repositioning. And then, of course, I talk about any issues involving career success, personal branding, and lifting yourself up and out into a higher realm in the industry. Those are kind of my 2 non-industry topics, and ones that I enjoy immensely. Funny enough, because you mentioned it, I'm also beginning a new speaking topic, which, as you know, requires a lot of research and thought, on imposter syndrome and how to overcome this. And I've been running into people, CEOs of major companies that have been in this position for 5, 6, 7 years, where they still feel like they're dealing with imposter syndrome a bit, down to school teachers and others. It's a real issue today, and I don't necessarily understand it completely, but it's one that's worth talking about because so many people suffer from it. Even gold medal athletes suffer from imposter syndrome, which I find, I'm talking Olympic athletes, suffer from it, and talk about the stressors that hit them from an imposter syndrome standpoint. But I'm not ready to unveil that yet and unwrap it and start doing it. But I would love to be on a program with you sometime, Michael. I think we would be an amazing duo on stage for a keynote opportunity.
We'd have a lot of fun. And I think based off of my knowledge of some of imposter syndrome of being found out is also in terms of like you said with the Olympic athletes, is that what drives so many leaders, CEOs, Olympic athletes is this adversity of I'm not good enough. That's their driving. Michael Jordan got on stage to receive his Hall of Fame award and just discussed all of the people who thought he wasn't good enough, and that was his driving force to becoming who he was and who he is today. And so that plays into the imposter syndrome, because now that you've achieved it, it's who am I? It's I've gotten the gold. I am the CEO. Who am I? And it's and you're in the right space with this, because it's rediscovering your new identity. There's a new identity that needs to be formed in this moment. So you're right on in the right place to be speaking about it. I want to get to we've talked really. I feel like we've talked about the book the entire time, but I want to make sure everybody knows one or two key takeaways. We already know what they are, but one or two key takeaways, because I want you to also share where people can get their books as we start concluding this.
Sure. So, I mean, just to put it in a nutshell, an elevator speech, the book really shares my personal and professional journey through Marines to professional magician for 15 years to becoming a global chairman of a very large hotel tourism and leisure consultancy, and the steps and decisions that I made, but also the learnings over those 30 plus years as it relates to personal branding. That's essentially the book. There's a lot in there. It's very personal, but it gives people there's a lot of exercises in the book to work through, some thought processes to get their juices flowing, and some challenges to see, if people are up to the challenge of the next step in their professional life. I would say too, there's some funny stories in there that we've not discussed. For sure. The last chapter is a story about a kid with cowboy boots, and I don't want to give it away, but it's a funny story that happened to me on a cruise ship. And the book is available anywhere, thanks to distribution by Simon & Schuster, anywhere they sell books. So it just dropped on Tuesday. Again, we've got these author signings all over. If somebody's in New York or Orlando or Honolulu or one of the markets, I would love to see them in person. They can look at their local Barnes & Noble and see if there's an author signing. But it's available from Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Target, Walmart, anywhere you buy books.
It's so cool to be able to meet the author. I think it's just really, really neat. And my last question for you in terms of the book is Simon Schuster. So we talked about being self-published and then getting a publisher. Have you ever been self-published? Do you see a difference? And how did you land such a great publisher?
So let's be very clear. My first book, the first version of From Invisible to Icon, was self-published, and I used a publishing house, and I did not get the results that I wanted in that process, to be honest. But I knew nothing about it. I was a novice completely, and I didn't achieve the results that I wanted. I also didn't feel super great about the book at the end of the day, because I didn't feel like I vetted it enough with some smart people. So this time around, I wanted to jump through every hoop, cross every T, dot every I, and make sure it was the best possible product that I could put together. So I had a lot of people pre-read the book for me. Everything from David Kong, who was CEO and global chairman for Best Western International globally, really smart, a lot of smart people, some best-selling authors, one of which I will send you some email on, because he's one of the ones who wrote one of those 3 books that was really good. But just people that I trusted to read the book. And then I finished it and put it into the Word doc, and I started shopping publishers, and I knew I wanted a real publisher, and by that I mean a real partner that would step up and guide me in how to make this book better from a quality product standpoint, from a distribution standpoint and make the most of it. And I found a gentleman by the name of David Bernstein, someone I would highly recommend you reach out to, Michael, at Post Hill Press. And they're an independent publisher with distribution from Simon & Schuster. And David has been in the publishing industry for 4 decades. He's very, very knowledgeable and someone that I've learned to trust. In fact, I was exchanging email with him right before you and I got together about some things related to this author signing event in Dublin, Ireland. But they've been terrific, and with the support of Simon & Schuster from a distribution standpoint, it's great to be on Simon & Schuster's page as an author, a Simon & Schuster author. But I'm equally proud of running through the Post Hill Press House as well. But I really wanted the real deal this time around, and I feel like I got it. I'm super proud of the book. And that's also what's allowed me to get into these book signings. Believe it or not, authors kind of have to promote their own books these days. Sure. It's not like anybody's opening up a bank account and marketing. And it doesn't matter if it's Simon & Schuster or Penguin or anybody else. They're going to count on you to promote the book. So all the book signings I have, I booked with the Barnes & Noble stores or other outlets directly. But part of it is, here's the book. Read the book, look at the product. Here's the distribution that I have. And here's my network of people. I think I can get 150 people at an author signing. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But that would be my recommendation for you, Michael, is that you consider more of a hybrid than just self-publishing. But I don't know how far down the road you are. But that was a great, it's been thus far a great experience, and I would follow the same path again and again and again.
That I'm so happy that I asked you that question, because I was just like, man, I meant to ask this, and I'm so happy I did, because you really just not just educated our audience, but you educated me on this whole process, and I really, really appreciate it. I have a past guest that I'll introduce you to, Mark Albert of Media Experts. I'm sure will be a really great connection for you in terms of this. I mean, like you said, as an author, you're like a rock star in a whole different genre, right? Like, I mean, rock stars like Taylor Swift goes on tour to sell her album, and you have you have to go to Barnes and Nobles to sell your book. And I mean, it's the way it is. But I will say this, from what I saw in your social media, Jay Shetty's lucky to have his book next to yours, from what I understand. I'm glad you like that one.
Yeah. That's funny. You know what's so funny? Jay must be. I mean, he is laughing all the way to the bank, because everybody who saw that post with my book next to his is like, "Oh, you're next to Jay Shetty," and then that's the end of the conversation. I'm like, "Yeah, but I have a book on the show," and they're like, "Yeah, but you're next to Jay Shetty." So kudos to him. I mean, wow, that is I'm going to start thinking like a monk myself.
That's right.
I gotta read that, but I have to tell you, it's been a joy and a pleasure, Michael. This has got to be my favorite interview so far. I've really, really enjoyed it, and honestly, I've done interviews every day this week. That's part of the hustle too. But this has been very genuine and authentic, and you come across so warm and welcoming, Michael. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I appreciate that, and thank you too for coming on. I look forward to hopefully one day meeting with you, like you said, getting on a ticket together and standing on stage together. For all of our audio listeners, could you just share your links as to how to get in touch with you?
Sure, it's so easy. Just do a Google search, John, John, Fareed, Fareed, and it'll populate my LinkedIn, my Facebook, and probably more than I want to admit. But eventually, at some point, when you keep scrolling, Fareed Zachariah comes up, and I'm always very proud of that he's next. And eventually, Fareed Q-Tip, the rapper, comes up. But wow. in terms of Fareed's, I'm the leading guy.
You're the leading guy.
At least under John, because Q-Tip is John Fareed as well.
I didn't realize that. That's funny.
But yeah, if you go through and do a search of just my name, it'll pop up. And I'm happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with people on Facebook. I don't have a whole bunch of Facebook people, but I'm happy to do that. And generally, this is going to be very difficult, Michael. But my email address, should I share my email address? Is that too much?
If you'd like, but I'm sure that just finding you on LinkedIn, anybody who's looking for advice, looking to work with you is a great one. What I would say is your website. It's johnfareed.com.
johnfareed.com. Again, it's super
easy, and all the links for everything that you need are there. The book is there, the social media is there, and like you said, you could just Google that. So it really has been a pleasure having you on. I want to end with your mantra. You mentioned it mid-show, and that is be open in all things, be lucky in all things. Sure.
That's it right there. And I'm going to close with one other thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
And that is a great friend of mine shared with me a quote that I've held on to, and that is, 5 years from now, you will be the same person you are today, but for the people you meet and the books you read. And I hang on to that, because that to me is so true. So that's the other one that I look forward to. So I want to read more and I want to meet more people. That's the game.
And I'll add to that quote, and the podcast you listen to.
Oh, that's good. I like that. I'm going to change it forever. I'm changing it forever. That's what I'm going to say.
That's it. And Mike drop there. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast. Thank you again to our sponsor, Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. That's DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. This episode was produced by Uncle Mike at the iHeart Studios in Poughkeepsie. Special thanks to Lara Rodrian for the opportunity and my team at Michael Esposito Inc.